morning again. Part of my faith system and my spiritual belief is that such a thing as divine appointment exists. Having said that, I don't assume or think or even hope that my standing up here this morning with a message for you is divine appointment in any way, shape, or form. Actually, what I'm referring to is that there's a poem that I love. And I spoke with Philip some time ago about it, about the fact that I really wanted to share this poem with the congregation as a kind of unlikely meditation. And we decided that it would be for the last Sunday of the year because, as it turned out, and this is where divine appointment begins, no one had volunteered to be the worship associate for the last Sunday of the year. And in a moment of really hoping that somebody else was going to step up to the podium and I could wiggle out of it, I agreed to be Plan Z. Like not B or C or D or even L or Q or W, but Plan Z, because it really wasn't what I wanted to do, which is kind of funny because I am not the worship associate this morning. It is so much, I don't want to say worse, because this is not a bad thing, but it is so much more than just being the worship associate in the middle of everybody trying to plan for their holidays and all of the busyness that everybody, including me, is involved in right now. And I really wasn't prepared for this, but here I am. So my initial panic was, oh my God, how am I going to come up with a message for today of all days? We're putting a bow on one year and ushering in a new year. And we've suffered a loss and a trauma as a church body, and here I am. So I thought about it, and I thought about it, and I thought about it, and I kept going back to this idea of this poem that I had talked to Philip about. And I had asked him, I said, it's a really unlikely meditation, but what do you think? Can we make it work? I have a lot to say about this poem, as unusual and unlikely as it seems to be a starting place for any kind of meditation, which now translates into a message. But I believe in it, and I always have, and I think it has something valuable to say, and it really means something. So when I talked to him about it, his response was, go for it. I agree. So in the furthering of that whole divine appointment thing, here I am with this message for you this morning about a poem that I think has a really important point to it from a rather unlikely source. And so without any further draw out or build up, this is the poem that I spoke to Philip about. This is the poem that I have carried with me throughout my life from the very first time that I heard it. This is the poem that I think has a message that really needs to be said. I've got an incredible headache. My temples are throbbing with pain. It feels like a freight train with two locomotives is chugging about in my brain. I'm sure I can't stand it much longer. My head's being squeezed in a vice, while regiments march to the blaring of trumpets and thousands of tap-dancing mice. My head's filled with horrible noises. There's a man mashing melons inside. Someone keeps drumming on bongos and plumbing as porpoises thrash in the tide. An elephant herd is stampeding. A volcano is blowing its top. And if I keep hitting my head with this hammer, I doubt that my headache will stop. The poem was written by Jack Prelutsky and published in his book New Kid on the Block in 1984. I was 21 when the poem was written, but I didn't discover it until around 1992 or 3, when my son was a little kid, and he was entranced by the imagery of poets like Jack Prelutsky. I would read poems to him by Ogden Nash, Shel Silverstein, and Jack Prelutsky to fuel his imagination and his love of the written word without ever considering the impact that these poets were having on my own life. So back to the poem and the message. My son was born in 1986. I was 23, and I was a mess. I spent more time and energy beating myself up for my failures than I actually spent actively pursuing my dreams. But I think a lot of people can relate to that. There I was in the middle of a life with a beautiful, innocent child who had no idea what a screw-up I was. And I was hell-bent on proving to him that I was a mess instead of just loving him or me. I couldn't let go of all the things that I'd done wrong. I just knew that if he or anybody else ever figured out what a fraud I was, that I would be done for. I never gave myself any credit for having done anything worthwhile or allowed any notion that I might just be a fairly decent human being. So time went by. A lot of time went by. And I learned that I wasn't entirely alone in this way of thinking and living. Matter of fact, it turns out that I was in some pretty good company. So now we fast forward, and it's 2018, and I'm 55. My son is now grown and married with a successful career. I have 2 more grown children. I am married to the love of my life. I live in a home I've owned for 22 years. I have a good job and a circle of friends that include some of the most amazing people I have ever met. So what could possibly be wrong? I'll tell you what's wrong. I've got an incredible headache. My temples are throbbing with pain. It feels like a freight train with 2 locomotives is chugging about in my brain. Fairly recently, I have come to discover that I am still holding on to that hammer. And so I'm determined to find out not only why I still have it, but how to put it down. As a species, we human beings have a lousy track record on self-forgiveness. We are great at self-defense, but self-defense is not the same as self-forgiveness, and actually, it really gets in the way. We tend, as the children and some of our grown people showed us earlier, to isolate and punish ourselves when we make mistakes or bad choices or show any signs of imperfection. I think part of it comes from a survival mentality. Show no weakness, only the strong survive. But what that does to us on a human level is that it pushes us into self-defense, where we find ourselves so entrenched in asserting to the world why we were right or justified in our actions that we cannot face the reality that what we really were was in error. Our spirit knows it, and despite how expertly we may publicly defend our actions, our spirits will suffer and continue to recriminate our inner selves until it renders us spiritually impotent and robs us from our ability to live in a peaceful and integrated space. When a person lives long-term in a place of self-doubt, self-punishment, or self-imposed exile from any idea of goodness because of what we know about ourselves that we don't allow anyone else to know, we live without peace and without integration. We literally disintegrate our lives. We force ourselves into the dichotomy of who we see ourselves to be in the depth of our private souls and who we present ourselves to be to the rest of the world. And like any other species, our survival depends on playing the game well. So the question to why we behave this way then becomes, what is the deeper cause? When my rational mind knows and abundant evidence exists to prove that failure and error are completely common to the human existence, then why do I furiously hide my flaws? More importantly, why do I hide my flaws when doing so causes my soul to suffer? I wish I had some nice, easy, and palatable answer to you to this question, but I don't. My job is to pose the question to you, not to answer it for you. Your answers, after all, might be very different from my own, and that's okay. As a matter of fact, it's great because that means you don't have to be me. You only have to be you. And the answer for you might very well be different than the answer for me. So this leads to the next question. What is fair and reasonable to my human self? To answer that question, for me, I have to be willing to crack myself open and sit in the muck of my existence until my eyes adjust to the dimness of things I have left hidden in the dark, until I can see them for what they really are. It is likely I'm not going to want to be honest about what I see. It is so much easier if I were seeing things that someone else had done. It is, after all, much easier to point the finger at someone else than at yourself. But if the point is to shed light on what humanity looks like, then we have to begin to extend grace to ourselves that we have been taught we should be extending to others. But the question in reality is not necessarily what is fair and reasonable to my human self. It is what is fair and reasonable to all of humanity. This is a much more difficult question to wrestle with, because this question expects you to balance the grace that you ask for yourself and extend it to grace that you should be giving to others. Again, I have no easy answers for you, but again, that's not my job. I wrestle with the same questions that I pose to you. I live in the same human and fallible existence as you do. I will not dictate to you what you are to think, perceive, or believe in your own pursuit of your own truth. Only you can do that. The only thing I ask of you is that you open your soul when you seek the answers to those questions. At the end of each worship service, we say as our spoken affirmation, love is the doctrine of this church. The quest for truth is its sacrament, and service is its prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge in freedom, to serve humanity in fellowship, to the end that all souls shall grow into harmony with the divine. Thus do we covenant with one another. This covenant and the impact it's had on my life leads me to believe that despite our differences and despite our fears, the things we hold in common, the things that bind us together as a community, are bound in by love and divinity. For those of us that are theistic, divinity might look like acknowledgement of a source of power or goodness or creativity that is completely separate from our human existence. For those of us who are atheist or humanist, it might look like or feel like a state of human existence that transcends the mundane or expected and takes us to a place of ecstasy and integration that defies the ordinary hum of our everyday lives. The point is that we are here as a covenantal congregation to love and accept one another, not in spite of, but maybe even because of, our faults and our foibles. We are here to support one another as we struggle our way through a human existence on our way to a divine experience. However you find your way to that place is up to you. I cannot tell you the way, offer you a roadmap, critique whether you are right or wrong on your journey, or stand as some source of cosmic ultimatum. All I can offer you is my wholehearted encouragement of your genuine efforts to become the best and most effective person that you can be, and that the start of your effort is your unequivocal acknowledgement to the right to your own humanity. Once you have freed yourself from your expectation of perfection and your unrealistic and punitive supposition that you are devoid of value if you are found to be flawed, you will find that you have all the permissions and talents that you need to fulfill not only your own destiny, but to help your brothers and sisters on their way to their destinies as well. This does not mean that we're not accountable to one another for the harm that we may cause when we, despite our best intentions, follow a course of action that hurts or impedes others. We are all capable of not just hurting, but actually harming other people, even people we love. And when that happens, how do we cope? What can we do to find a place of balance and healing? We must start by applying empathy and support to ourselves first, because until we do that, we will operate out of a place of self-defense, and we will likely minimize or refuse to acknowledge the hurt that we've caused. Once we are in a right state with ourselves, we can honestly apply that same empathy and support to those who are suffering because of our actions. Personal accountability is a difficult road to walk. It is uncomfortable and it is lonely. But ultimately, while it might at first glance look like the road to destruction, it is actually the best and fastest road to healing. Think how you feel when someone wrongs you. What is really the first thing that you want from them? It's an apology, right? It's an acknowledgement that they screwed up, whether they meant to or not. What you need to see from them in order to move on is remorse. Believe it or not, what you're looking for when you wrong someone else is the same thing that your soul is looking for when you err and then try to dodge the emotional fallout of that error. Your soul needs to feel your remorse, your acceptance, and your forgiveness. It is time to change how you deal with yourself. It is time to extend to yourself the same compassion and empathy that you extend to those you love who have hurt you. So whatever the divine means to you, whatever that experience feels like or entails for you, the next time you find yourself in a place of spiritual quandary, pause for a moment. Connect to that place of divinity and ask yourself, does this place where you experience the divine, where you connect to something greater than your own daily existence, hold you in condemnation or in love? When you get out of your own narrative, the answer is always love. If that which is greater than yourself is always a place of love, then who are you to hold yourself in contempt? Standing on the precipice where 1 year yields to another, purpose for yourself to create a spiritual practice from your failures, or to create a spiritual practice in your planning that gives you space to be a whole human being. And while you're at it, try starting that exercise with forgiving yourself for forgetting that you were a human being in the first place. Blessed be.